Redditors who work at remote places like forest officers, oil rig workers, etc. What creepy things have you noticed while at work? I used to work at a Boy Scout summer camp. Every week I had to take a big group of campers to a secluded spot for their wilderness survival badge, where they had to build a shelter out of sticks, leaves, etc., and sleep in it overnight. The spot was only about half a mile from the main camp, but we took them a circuitous route that made it seem really secluded. Anyways, on this one night, all the campers had made their shelters, we had cooked dinner, and we were all just sitting around the campfire. It was getting late, maybe 11 o'clock, so I sent all the campers to their shelters for the night and started cleaning up the fire. That's when we heard in the distance what sounded like church bells. They were pretty faint, but myself and fellow staffers could definitely hear them. They went on for about 30 minutes, ringing every 30 seconds or so. We were a little creeped out, as there were no churches or towns within 20 miles of us. After the bells stopped, though, the singing started. It was too faint to hear the words, but it sounded like church choir music. But a lot of people, and a lot more enthusiastic. Also, it was almost midnight at this point. The singing went on for well over an hour, sometimes quieting down until we almost couldn't hear it, sometimes getting so loud we thought it was getting closer. All of the campers were super creeped out, but I lied to them, telling them there was a church service going on in the camp, and that there was nothing to be scared of. Eventually, at almost 1 a.m., the singing stopped. I found out a few days later that there had been a large KKK rally only a few miles away that night, and that's what we had heard. Well, it sounds like you missed an opportunity to get all the kids a battle merit badge. I used to work in the Gulf of Mexico on oil rigs for years, and it may not exactly be creepy, but I found it really unsettling. In deep, open water, the water itself is really clear, so everyone can plainly see all the tuna and barracudas hanging around the rig, waiting for the onboard cook to throw off whatever food waste he needs to. Every once in a while, a huge great white shark would just swim up from underneath and snatch a tuna, and it really took like less than a second. They're really scary. Makes you kind of wonder, if the fish are living off of the scraps from the oil rig, what are all the other billions of fish in the sea living off of? I've worked in Canada's north for a few years now in oil and gas. It's pretty creepy when during night shift you realize a moose has just been standing at the tree line staring you down for an unknown length of time. Or finding bear tracks crossing the tracks you just made 5 minutes ago. Honestly, the silence of a snowy forest in the dead of night, hundreds of kilometers away from anything, is pretty spooky. When your only contact to the outside world is a radio channel nobody's listening to, you feel pretty alone. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. If you really want to see just how isolated some parts of the world are, just go on to Google Maps. Just look up in the far north and it seems like it goes on forever. I used to be a delivery driver, which doesn't sound very remote because it isn't. However, I did have to deliver to some pretty remote places. One time I delivered to a trailer park just barely inside our designated delivery zone, and it was very dark and poorly lit. I leave my car running and keep the headlights and inside lights on to go deliver the pizza. Upon returning to my car, I sit down in the driver's seat and look up to see a creepy old man standing less than 3 feet from my side of the car. He was just staring. It was the equivalent of a jump scare. I just started driving forward, had to do a U-turn to get out of the park. When I turned around, the man was standing in the middle of the road. So I freaked out for a second before speeding around him, only to watch him attempt to chase my car out of the trailer park. I put in my 2 weeks after that. It's kind of funny we have some crossover because the pizza delivery driver story we had yesterday wasn't too different from this one. I was on a boat sitting on anchor in a secluded bay in the early hours in the southeast Alaska a few years ago. I stepped outside for a smoke, and all of a sudden I heard the most horrific sounds of a wild animal being murdered by another wild animal. It went on for probably 10 minutes. I know it's just nature, but man, I can still hear the sound in my brain and it haunts me. You know, that actually happened to me a couple months ago. I just went out for a night walk at around midnight, and I heard some shrieking sound coming from this gully. I have no idea what kind of animal or creature it was, but it sounded like it was dying. I used to do agricultural work, alone in a field for 10 hours a day kind of thing. The pure amount of times I heard the sound of running and snapped up to see literally nothing there was horrific. I was convinced it was surely animals between the trees for a while, but the weirdest moment was when I heard it loudly from a row of trees next to me, and immediately ducked under to see the feet of whatever animal was running by, and there was absolutely nothing. I remember trying to stay calm and walk really fast to the toilet block and sitting there for a good long while before I came back. I never thought I'd be so freaked out in the daytime, but there wasn't a soul nearby for quite a way, and it really amped up my imagination. It really is true though, your imagination can really be one of the scariest things you encounter. I would say I'm not really afraid of the dark, but sometimes when I walk into a dark place, my mind just starts going at hyperspeed, just imagining a million different things, and then suddenly I'm terrified for no reason. I was a field geologist in the outback, about 12 hours north of Adelaide. One day I was driving the truck and saw what looked like a flagpole sticking up in the middle of nowhere. I wasn't anywhere near a farm or anywhere else that people would be, so I decided to drive over and check it out. It was a dead dog fully impaled on a spike, like from the butt to the mouth. I took some pictures and had my boss call the cops, but for the rest of the assignment I was freaked out that some maniac was out there with me. Yeah, there's not a whole lot that can really survive way out in central Australia, so you never know what kind of weirdos could be hiding out there. I do a lot of work out in the woods. Creepiest thing was finding some headless doves. I also found sticks arranged in circles and paint on the trees in the same spot. Not sure if it was part of a ritual or not, but that's what I saw. Yeah, I always have to wonder whenever people talk about finding weird and creepy stuff just out of the ordinary out in the woods, how often it's just some LARPers just trying to be edgy. I was the creepy occurrence. I live on a ranch off of a quiet dirt road. Our distant neighbors, the nearest house is about 1 mile away as the crow flies, have had issues with people stealing things out of their outbuildings and storage sheds in the area. It was also late in the year, so it was starting to get dark around 6 p.m. So as a result, every time I would see headlights go down our road, I would watch to make sure they weren't stopping on the property. One evening, I see a vehicle going very slowly down the road and come to a stop at the end of our driveway, about 120 yards from our front porch. The vehicle is parked right in front of a 60s pickup I have parked, so I think whoever it is might be looking to steal it, or just looking over the property. Whatever the case, I decide to put on a black coat and grab my rifle to go investigate. It's dark out, so I stay out of the headlights of the vehicle so I can get close. I can tell it's a white van, but I don't see anything else distinguishing about the van. When I'm about 50 yards away, the van backs up and turns into our driveway. I freeze as the headlights wash across me standing in the middle of the driveway, and I see the reflective FedEx logos on the side of the van. Needless to say, the FedEx driver probably crapped his pants as he suddenly sees a dark figure standing in the middle of the field, in the dark, holding a rifle. Surprisingly, after I try to give a friendly wave and smile, he continues up the driveway to the house. And I get to explain the situation, and we both have a laugh. So that's how I got to be the creepy guy in some FedEx delivery driver's story. Man, they're just trying to do their jobs, they don't need all of this. I spent some time in the peat swamp forests of Borneo studying wild orangutan. We would go into the forest very early, around 4 a.m. One morning there was a clouded leopard on the trail we used to enter the forest. It was just crouching there watching us. We shouted, tried to act big. One of the indigenous people we worked with even took out his slingshot and shot rocks at it. He missed on purpose, trying to scare it off. It stayed there for a good 5 minutes watching us before it slowly walked into the thick brush off the cleared trail. When we walked by, I shined my light to where it had walked to, and could clearly see a pair of reflective eyes only 3 meters away, crouched, watching us pass. Creepy, but also incredibly cool to see one in person for how critically endangered they are. I think there might be some kind of leopard in my room right now. I was on guard duty at Camp Phoenix on the outskirts of Kabul in 2011. It's a 12-hour shift and it started at 7 p.m. Around 2 a.m. I could hear what sounded like footsteps, running all around the guard tower. Promptly set my hairs on end, so I pull out my night vision and pray that it's some kids or something. I kid you not, there must have been 2 or 3 pairs of dogs humping each other at the same time. Hey, I guess dogs have to sneak out at night to do it too. I've been fishing out in the Gulf of Mexico where they'd have some oil rigs. The rig wasn't being used, from what we knew, so we would get pretty close to it and fish for red snapper. While we were out there, we could have sworn we heard screams of a woman over and over. It was something, but the explanation was wind making the noises as it blew through the rig. Well, that's what we were told, but it totally creeped us out. See, everyone loves to make the mountain lion excuse when they talk about screams heard out in the wilderness, but I don't think there's any mountain lions out in the Gulf of Mexico. I spent several seasons working at a remote field camp in Antarctica, over 1,000 kilometers from the main station in McMurdo. Every once in a while, a skua bird or Antarctican tern would accidentally end up following one of the small planes out to our camp. Once there, though, they'd basically be stranded with no way to get back to the coast. I would get out of my tent some mornings and see a lonely tern circling overhead, knowing it was a dead bird flying. It was quite creepy. Along these lines, when birds or seals do die down there, it's so cold and dry that their bodies don't decay either. They essentially mummify. Outside McMurdo at Scott's Discovery Hut, there's still a perfectly preserved seal carcass from 1912 sitting by the entrance of the hut. See, when it started talking about working at a remote base in Antarctica, I almost expected it to turn out something like The Thing. I know a forest ranger who regularly stays at these remote cabin/fire tower outposts. She'll wake up in the morning and look out the window to soak in the landscape, only to see influencers posing for photos. Welcome to the roaring 20s. Working on ships. There was one night I was on a ship sailing through Alaskan waters, and it happened to be my first night ever seeing northern lights. I can't believe how awesome that was. It made the sky clear, made the night look like it was dusk. We were able to see clearly for miles. A few buddies and I hit the roof, or what we call Lido deck, at 1 a.m. just to gaze at it. An hour or so in, there was 6 of us on top, nearly the entire crew now. A big white spotlight shines at us. We were near land, but where the spotlight was above the water, and it wasn't low enough to be on the ship. It was very high up. It shined on us for about 15 to 20 seconds. Once the light turned off, we looked to see what it was. Saw nothing, no trace of an aircraft or anything. A couple of minutes go by and the same light shined on us. This time it was on the other side of our vessel, above mountains. Still, unable to see what it was, we all saw it. We all have never seen any aircrafts hovering above these waters, especially at 2 a.m. We don't know what it was. We think it might have been some sort of silenced aircraft the military was probably doing drills or something. But anyways, that was one of the weirder things to happen out on the ocean. See, the typical culprits for these things are either militaries or aliens. Why can't people ever figure that it's something more realistic, like ghosts or dragons? I worked in a store once in a really small town that was always absolutely dead. A customer every hour or so. Shifts all alone too, which I'm sure wasn't even legal, but hey. Anyway, it's a dark evening and I'm sat on Reddit as usual when I hear the door open. I look up and see the back of a man as he begins walking down the first aisle towards the tinned foods, and he appears to be talking to someone on the phone. I think nothing of it and go back to Reddit. All of a sudden I get this intense smell of soil and earth. I look up and the man's approaching the counter and he's wearing some kind of overalls, and his face and long gray hair and bodysuit is just covered in dirt. That's when I noticed he isn't on the phone at all, and is just talking to himself in this absolutely bizarre tone. He sounded like a cartoon elf or something. He's just sort of murmuring and doing this really weird hee-hee sort of laugh. I'm just frozen solid, as he stood at the counter in front of me thinking I'm about to be killed when a policeman storms through the door. He asks if I'm okay, which I don't respond because I'm just in a complete state of what the F is happening. Tells the man to come outside, to which he starts murmuring gibberish and saying the words legal over and over again. They come grab the man and put him in the back of a police car, and that's the last I ever heard of it. I have no idea who he was, what was going on, but I've never been so afraid of another person before. You know when you just get a sense of a bad situation. So grateful the police showed up when they did. So wait, you had some like real-life garden gnome walk into your shop and then the police came and took him away? Do you live in a cartoon or something? I worked night shift for a prison for years. The one thing that really creeps you out is when a hit is put on someone in the middle of the night. Inmates' code says that it's kept as quiet as possible. No one says a word. The only thing you hear are grunts and moans from the victims. Then it goes and stays silent. If you hear it happening, it's already too late to stop it. It'll be over before you pull your keys out. Occasionally, if someone needs medical attention, the first sign we got was an inmate approaching the bars, saying they needed to go to medical, and are usually bleeding all nonchalant. The creepy ones are when no one shows up. All you get is grunts of pain, and that's it. Yeah, prison doesn't seem like a very nice place, for the guards or the inmates. I was serving as a fireman for my nation's compulsory national service. Once we were called into the forest to retrieve a body who was found hanging on a noose, deep along one of the running trails. He had apparently committed suicide by hanging himself off a tree, and was found by a few morning joggers. What's creepy was, we found a straw doll at the foot of the tree. It was stabbed with a few red bobby pins in the head, facial area, and there was also an unknown talisman that was half burnt where the doll was sitting. When we took the body down, we had to carry him a few kilometers out of the forest, and halfway along the journey, a previously unnoticed wound on his face started bleeding. One of my men sweared that it was bleeding from the same spot as where the bobby pin was stuck on the doll, but we could not confirm it as we left the doll where his body was found, for the police. We passed the body to the paramedics and booked our way out of the area. Have you guys ever heard those stories of those, the national forests, where there's all these mysterious disappearances, and they find just completely unexplainable people just going missing in the most bizarre places? There's a few pretty cool videos and documentaries if you search up Missing 411 on YouTube. I spent a summer in Wyoming going to BLM land and other remote locations collecting data on bats and herpetofauna. Heard a lot of weird noises like mountain lions screaming, deer snorting, what sounded like owls fighting. Woke up one morning to find 2 bull moose sleeping 20 yards behind my tent. All of this was part of the job, until one night a truck was driving towards us when we were on a BLM square in the southwestern part of the state. The truck was going over land, no road, and was slowly driving at us. It stopped about 100 yards away, turned off the lights, and we could see a person get out. They walked a full circle around us at 100 yards away, got back in the truck and turned around. This was after dark, and this shadowy figure did a complete circle around us. You could hear them walking through the sagebrush, and I'm sure they could hear us talking. We packed up after that and drove to a hotel an hour away. I called the office and told them I was taking a gun when we went back out. Didn't like having the bear mace as our only defense. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that the people that think that nobody should ever be able to own a gun have never experienced really living or working in a rural place like this. I'm sure there's plenty of places out there where people would think you were crazy for not owning a gun. Some friends and I were fishing in a small pond just after dark for catfish. We started to hear sounds coming off the water like someone was throwing softball-sized rocks, but they were coming from all over the pond. We thought someone was messing with us, and we called out a few times for them to stop, but we eventually got freaked out and left. Cut to a few years later, I'm fishing a different pond and hear the same sound. Turns out it was a beaver slapping its tail on the water to drive me from its territory. When beavers become problems in rivers, they relocate them to ponds and towns. You know, I feel like beavers are pretty hard to come by. Like, there's a river trail that I've ridden my bike down a lot, and I mean, I've seen owls, I've seen skunks, lots of cats, I've seen deer, like all sorts of animals, but I've never seen beavers. Like, I've seen trees that beavers have eaten up, but I've never seen the actual animals. I work on North Sea oil rigs on an ad hoc basis, off the coast of Scotland. Wouldn't say anything was particularly paranormal or creepy, but it can be a very unsettling and weird place. Fog can come rolling in out of nowhere, and on other rigs you can see off the sides can disappear in front of your eyes. Sometimes you can't see the walkway 6 feet in front of you, or if you're walking over grading, you couldn't see the sea below your feet. But you can hear it, albeit muffled. The fog can roll in over the course of a few minutes too, so a perfectly clear day becomes pea soup. You can also feel the rig moving and swaying on high winds and rough seas, even though it's a fixed leg platform. Very unnerving to feel your office swaying when it shouldn't be. My last trip was the first ever night shift, and I found it particularly unsettling as you've got the background noise of the plant, but I walked around the whole rig without seeing another living soul for the whole shift. Usually there are about 130 people on board, although smaller rigs have smaller head counts. Usually once a trip, I'm hit by this awareness that you are just very isolated in the middle of nowhere. Most rigs I've worked on are an hour's chopper ride from land, so if things go wrong it can escalate very quickly. You know, I'd love to spend some part of my life one day just working a job, something like this. I think that that would be just so cool and surreal just to spend some time just so isolated and just feel how creepy that can be. But that's all of the creepy stories for this weekend. Let me know if you guys have any stories similar to these. It's kind of interesting that so many people love to go camping, and camping can turn out to be a fun family activity, but it could also turn out to be a horror story.